Pre-order the official Fact Hunt book from Unbound.com today! No, seriously. In these days of bland, big-budget publishers such as EA, Activision and Ubisoft, it's easy to forget that the whole video game industry was formed by quirky, off-the-wall people with personality, all experimenting to try and discover the next big thing. But while many of these software houses sprang up from the bedrooms of aspiring programmers and existing technology companies, there were a few that had, well, shall we say, more unusual roots. So this episode, we take a look at these eerie elders, these peculiar patrons, and these strange supporters, as I say, but hello you! I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt, 5 incredibly bizarre origins of video game publishers.
Attention shoppers, the new Atari cartridge game is in.
When it comes to the Atari 2600, one of the most interesting talking points will always be the series of porn games released on it. Titles such as Beat 'em and Eat 'em, Custer's Revenge and X-Man have been the subject of many a YouTube video, endlessly perplexing at how anyone could ever get off at coloured Tetris shapes mating. But hey, these were the days before the internet. Beggars can't be choosers. But of the different companies that produced under-the-counter games for the 2600, Mystique are by far the most interesting. Founded in 1982, the company president famously stating his reason for producing pornographic video games was because he didn't believe adults just wanted to shoot down rocket ships. The company already had well-founded roots within the adult industry, as Mystique were an offshoot of the Caballero Control Corporation, one of the biggest producers of pornographic films in Hollywood, as well as American multiple industries who had long been funding a number of adult-orientated businesses. Mystique's games were sold under the banner of being Swedish erotica, but the closest thing they ever came to Sweden was being sold in a store next to an IKEA. Their game Custer's Revenge gained particular notoriety, as in the game the player controls the character of Custer, a naked man sporting a cowboy hat and a very visible 8-bit erection, who was obviously inspired by American General George Armstrong. Custer was most famous for being defeated by Native Americans at the Battle of Little Bighorn, with the game itself exacting his revenge via sexual assault, hence the controversy. But in the game, George has to avoid these falling licorice sticks in order to sleep with a crudely depicted large-breasted female tied to a cactus. Yeah, can you imagine them releasing something like that today? The game obviously prompted complaints from a number of different groups, with women's rights campaigners, anti-pornography lobbyists, Native Americans, and video game critics all lodging angry complaints. Ultimately, Mystique was short-lived as a company, as just over a year later the North American video game crash hit and decimated the small amount of sales they already had. The division was sold to Play Around Games, who continued to sell the Swedish erotica titles for a couple more years before disappearing completely themselves. They say that sex sells, but Mystique found out that the only things their games turned on was the consoles they were plugged into.
Would you get away?
If your family's looking for fashions, there's only one place to look.
For anyone watching this that grew up in Canada, Zellers will be a household name. Founded in 1931 by one Walter P. Zeller as a store for the thrifty inhabitants of America's Hat, it quickly expanded across the towns and cities of southern Ontario before a series of mergers and acquisitions saw Zellers spread out across the whole of the country. By the year 1999, they had no less than 350 stores, making them a major presence in North American retail. Like any other good retailer, Zellers are always quick to catch on to the latest trends. So come the early 80s, it's no surprise to learn that they had become a major supplier of video game consoles and accessories. Keen to get an even larger slice of this growing market, Zellers decided that they should start producing their own games for the leading Atari 2600. Living up to their reputation of being the cheapest place in town, Zellers decided that these games would retail for as little as $6.99, massively undercutting their rivals. So, how did they do this, Larry, I hear you ask? Well, it's quite simple, really. They just ripped off other people's games. And when I say ripped off, I really mean it. They literally hacked well-known games by big publishers such as Activision, iMagic, and even Atari themselves, gave them a new name, and voila! And in many cases, they didn't even bother to change the artwork. So Defender became Earth Attack, Keystone Capers masqueraded as Busy Police, and Atlantis transformed into Ocean City Defender. It would be like today's Walmart selling games called Raiding Tombs and Auto Theft on their brightly coloured shelves. But how Zellers actually got away with this for so long is anyone's guess. There's certainly no evidence of any lawsuits against the company for this blatant publishing pilfering. So, what became of Zellers and their video game division? Well, they pulled out of making their own games once again after the infamous North American video game crash, but continued to sell entertainment products and electronics for many years to come. Eventually, though, the competition caught up with them, and after heavy losses incurred by the arrival of larger, cheaper stores such as Walmart from over the border, the company was forced into liquidation in 2011. Many of their shops were sold to Target as part of their new Canadian operation, with the rest closing a short time after. Amazingly, Zellers are still in existence though, operating just 2 stores in their home province of Ontario, selling liquidated and discounted stock from other retailers. So I guess you could say that zelling pirated video games didn't work out for them after all. I'll get my coat.
This is the arcade experience. We're ColecoVision, and we bring the arcade experience home.
Now, for many of you people out there, Coleco are synonymous with video games. From their early tabletop LED-powered arcade games like Frogger and Pac-Man, to the popular ColecoVision console, and plenty in between. There's no doubting that Coleco were a huge player in the industry in the early 80s. So I can already hear you asking, then why are they here then, Larry? Well, keep your hair on, mate. I'm going to tell you. More than anything, the clue is in the name here, because Coleco is nothing more than an acronym for the Connecticut Leather Company, an American business founded in 1932 by Maurice Greenberg. The business initially supplied the leather and associated fixings to shoe repairers across the country, and in 1938 the company expanded and branched out into selling rubber footwear too. With the advent of World War II, the demand for the basic supplies that the company produced increased dramatically, and by the end of the war the company was huge, doing extremely well financially. So they expanded again by supplying new and used shoe machinery, hat cleaning equipment, and even street-side marble shoeshine stands. In the 1950s, Coleco, now under the guidance of Maurice's son Leonard, debuted a new kit that allowed children to make their own moccasin shoes. At the 1954 New York Toy Fair, this kit was selected as the Child Guidance Prestige Toy of the show, and with this, the Connecticut Leather Company accidentally fell into the toy business. But as a forward thinker, Leonard Greenberg embraced this and set up a new division within the company to come up with more ideas for kids. In 1961, the shoe and leather part of the business was sold off completely, and the company officially became Coleco Industries. By 1966, the company had grown massively, so Leonard persuaded his brother Arnold Greenberg to join the company. Further acquisitions added to the company's growth, namely Plaintime Products and Eagle Toys of Canada. By the end of the 1960s, Coleco ran 10 manufacturing facilities and had a new corporate headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut. Come 1976, Coleco had started to dabble in electronics, and their first console, the Coleco Telstar Arcade, was born, which was little more than another variation on Atari's home Pong console. From here, the company just exploded as their range of electronic handhelds became one of the hottest items on the market, before they licensed the MSX technology to create the ColecoVision console. The end of Coleco, however, mostly came thanks to the advent of the North American video game crash. Yes, for a third time on this episode. With the popularity of their best-selling Cabbage Patch dolls also waning, Coleco tried to find new ways to stay alive, but without success. Their Adam computer was riddled with issues that meant it was almost a non-starter from day one. The purchase of beleaguered board games manufacturer Cell and Writer in 1986 also proved to be a terrible decision, with that market plummeting also. And after some very brief success with a range of products based on the TV character Alf, Coleco just couldn't hold off the banks and entered liquidation in 1988, with the toy business being sold to Hasbro and the video game business being purchased by SLM Action Sports Incorporated. But Coleco's story doesn't end there, as the name was recently resurrected by Chicago-based River West Brands, who relaunched many of Coleco's favourite products for the ever-growing nostalgia market, including recreations of the famous tabletop LED games and a plug-and-play version of the ColecoVision. But I won't mention the whole Coleco Chameleon debacle here though today. We'll save that story for another time. Not to be confused with US Gold, whose shady shenanigans probably deserve a video of their very own here, but possibly the most bizarre entry in our list, US Games were one of the prolific third-party publishers for the Atari 2600 in North America, producing innovative games such as Sneak and Peek, Word Zapper, and Name This Game. But rather than just ripping off the latest arcade games, US Games tried to do things a little bit differently, and their games are often mentioned when people discuss the 2600's hidden gems. They also produced a series of popular electronic games too, under their VidTech brand. Now, none of this sounds particularly out of the ordinary, but when I tell you who their parent company was, this story takes a new turn. This is because US Games were owned by none other than the Quaker Oats Company. Founded way back in 1877, Quaker has a turbulent and quite fascinating history that includes being owned by Pepsi, producing a hit Gene Wilder film, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, purchasing Fisher-Price, and the company that made Gatorade. However, the company will always be most famous for their porridge oats, with the iconic image of their Quaker founder on the box. Over here in the UK, they will also be well remembered for being the people behind the lovable Honey Monster and his tasty cereal Sugar Puffs, which was regularly advertised on TV back in the day. Quaker Oats are still one of the biggest players in today's cereal market and show no signs of going anywhere. Sadly, however, their short-lived video games division never had anywhere near the same level of success. US Games Company spokesman Ronald Bottrell was quoted as saying, "None of our games became a hit, so instead of pouring in a lot more capital into it, we decided to just drop it and stick to what we're good at." This didn't stop the company from having another little stab at the market again though, albeit in a very different form, as they started selling educational games via their Fisher-Price label in 1984, who continue this tradition to this very day, albeit under the guidance of Mattel, who bought the company in 1993. But I guess this story really shows that sowing your oats isn't always a good idea. Of course we'll save the most insane origin till last, and our final entry on our list probably deserves a video of its very own, because this is a story that wouldn't seem out of place in a Hollywood movie, let alone a YouTube video about interesting games publishers. It's a tale of barefaced fraud, suspicious deaths, run-ins with the Nazis and secret Mossad agents that's pretty much impossible to cover properly in such a short time. So I'll just try to cover the basics and bring you the story of Mirrorsoft themselves. Those of you who grew up in the UK will probably be well versed in the affairs of one Robert Maxwell. Born in 1923 as young Ludwig Hyman Binman Hock in what is now the Czech Republic, he escaped the clutches of the Nazis to find asylum in England and became one of the richest men in the country after building himself up from abject poverty. His story should be one to inspire every wannabe entrepreneur out there, but instead ends up serving as a lesson that crime never pays. From his early career as a Labour Party MP, Robert Maxwell came to purchase a company we now know as Mirror Group newspapers. This was his second attempt at a media empire, after having previously tried to buy the News of the World, where he ended up losing out to another controversial tycoon in Sky, Sun and previously Fox owner Rupert Murdoch. Mirrorsoft itself was one of a number of companies that Maxwell set up as he sought to increase his media empire. Originally started in 1982 as a publisher of educational software, it soon moved into games after Murdoch realised how lucrative that market was becoming. He wasn't just content with making games though, he also wanted a share of the hardware market too. And in 1985, he tried to purchase Sinclair Research from Sir Clive Sinclair, before the company and its best-selling ZX Spectrum computer was ultimately sold to rival Alan Sugar and his company Amstrad. Among the other companies Maxwell invested in was Oxford United Football Club, but that was only after a failed bid to buy Manchester United, MTV, IPC Media, Macmillan Books, Berlitz Language Schools, and Nimbus Records. Mirrorsoft themselves were hugely successful for being responsible for bringing titles such as Tetris, Speedball, Defender of the Crown, Xenon 2, Falcon, and Dungeon Master to British shelves. Many of these titles were sold under their sub-label, Imageworks, created to disconnect the company from much of the bad publicity Maxwell was receiving at the time. However, on the 5th of November 1991, Guy Fawkes night, he was last in contact with the crew of the Lady Ghislaine, his yacht, at 4:25 AM local time, but was found to be missing later in the morning. Maxwell was presumed to have fallen overboard from the vessel, which was cruising off the Canary Islands, and his naked body was subsequently recovered from the Atlantic Ocean. The official ruling at a Madrid inquest held in December 1991 was death by heart attack combined with accidental drowning, although 3 pathologists have been unable to agree on the cause of his death at the inquest. It soon emerged that Maxwell had stolen over £100 million from the pension funds of his company, and the aftermath of this left an impact on many people for years to come. It was also alleged that he had worked as a secret Mossad agent through his career as a politician and businessman, and that he had helped fund Israel's hugely controversial nuclear weapons program. Mirrorsoft was eventually sold to Acclaim Entertainment in 1993, and all remnants of the brand quickly vanished from the public eye. But who knew such dirty money helped fund some of your favourite video games, eh? And you lot complain about loot crates. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified, and be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.